So let's have a look at this question of science and God. Do they mix? And my fundamental conviction is that science and God mix very well, but science and atheism do not mix very well. So let's have some evidence. The first I would call is the history of science. And it has been noticed, particularly by philosophers like Sir Alfred North Whitehead, that there appeared to be a connection between the Judeo-Christian worldview and the rise of modern science in the 16th and 17th centuries. C.S. Lewis put it this way: men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. So that faith in God did not hinder the rise of modern science. It was the motor that drove it. Secondly, if science and God didn't mix, there would be no Nobel Prize winners who believed in God. Yet, the fact is that between 1900 and 2000, 65% of all of them did believe in God. The so-called war between science and religion is actually phony. Take two Nobel Prize winners in physics, William Phillips, an American, and Peter Higgs, a Scotsman. They're both brilliant. Their science does not divide them, but their worldviews do. Bill Phillips is a Christian, Peter Higgs an atheist. And if you think about that, we see that the real battle is not between science and God, but it's between the worldviews of theism and atheism, and there are scientists on both sides. Now, one of the problems in discussing all of this is the widespread idea called scientism, that science is the only way to truth. That often leads people to think that scientific means the same as rational, that is, in accord with reason. Now, that's clearly false, since academic disciplines like history, literature, philosophy, etc. are rational disciplines. Reason has a far larger scope than science. Scientism, or scientific fundamentalism, for that is what it really is false. And another way of seeing this is pointed out by the Nobel Prize winner Sir Peter Medawar. He says that the existence of a limit to science is very likely. Why? Because of its inability to answer childlike elementary questions. I have in mind, he says, such questions as: how did everything begin? What are we all here for? What's the point of living? And in order to approach these kind of things, I like to talk about the nature of explanation, because there are different kinds of explanation. Think of boiling water. There's a physics explanation in terms of the transfer of heat and the agitation of molecules. But then the water may well be boiling because I want a cup of tea, or some scientist needs boiling water to dissolve chemicals. That is, there's a scientific explanation and there's an agent explanation. They do not conflict or compete, they complement each other. And my view is that the God explanation doesn't conflict or compete with the science explanation, but complements it. We can see this very easily. For example, in order to explain an automobile engine, we might use the physics of internal combustion, or we might talk about Henry Ford. Both are rational explanations, but they're different, and both are necessary for a comprehensive explanation. And if we scale this up to the size of the universe, we might say that God no more competes with science as an explanation of the universe than Henry Ford competes with science as an explanation of the motor car. God is an agent creator explanation. He's not a scientific explanation. Now, let me come to the matter of faith, because there's great confusion about it. Many people today think that faith is a religious word and means believing where there's no evidence. That is false. That's blind faith. Faith is a normal word coming from the Latin fides, meaning fidelity, trust. And in order to do science, you've got to have faith. You've got to believe that science can be done. And that means, more precisely, believing in the mathematical intelligibility of the universe. Einstein once said he could not imagine a scientist without that faith. Now, in any sphere, the only kind of faith worth having is evidence-based. If I say I believe X, you've every right to say on what grounds. That is as true of faith in global warming as it's true of God. We're all people of faith. The question is, What do we believe, and on what grounds do we believe it? Now, the pioneers of science believed that the universe was rationally intelligible because they believed that the rational mind of God, the Creator, was behind it. And I often have a very interesting conversation with my atheist science friends. I say, what do you do science with? And they offer me the standard reductionist explanation. If there is no creator, no top-down causation, they say, then explanation must always proceed from the simple to the complex. So they tell me that mind or brain, and they're not the same in my view, is the end product of a mindless, unguided process. And I say to them, and you trust it. If you knew that your computer was the end product of a mindless, unguided process, would you trust it? And the interesting thing here is I've always got the answer no. So I say, you have a problem. You're using an instrument to do science, and you have an explanation for its existence that leads you to not be able to rationally trust it. And very often they say to me, where did you get this argument? And I say, well, actually, that might surprise you. I got it from Charles Darwin. He once wrote, with me, the horrid doubt always arises, whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Taking the logic of this statement further, physicist John Polkinghorne, who taught me quantum mechanics years ago at Cambridge, says, if you reduce mental events to physics and chemistry, you destroy meaning. He says, thought is replaced by electrochemical neural events. Two such events cannot confront each other in rational discourse. They are neither right nor wrong. They simply happen. The world of rational discourse disappears into the absurd chatter of firing synapses. Quite frankly, that can't be right, and none of us believe it to be so. And another leading philosopher, Thomas Nagel in New York, thinks in the same way. In his book, Mind and Cosmos, which is a very provocative subtitle, Why the Neo-Darwinian View of the World is Almost Certainly False, Nagel's a strong atheist, he writes, but if the mental is not itself merely physical, it cannot be fully explained by physical science. Evolutionary naturalism implies that we shouldn't take any of our convictions seriously, including the scientific world picture on which evolutionary naturalism itself depends. You see, there's one area where such ontological reductionism doesn't work, and that is where language is involved. If you see the word exit above a door, you instinctively know that besides whatever automatic processes go into making the sign, there must be a human mind because exit carries meaning. That meaning is not to be found in the physics and chemistry of the materials out of which the sign is made. So what are we going to say about DNA, the information-carrying macromolecule, 3.4 billion chemical letters long, carrying meaning? If exit implies mind, how much more does the existence of DNA imply mind? So on the plus side, both the mathematical intelligibility of the universe and the existence of biological words, plus the much more recently discovered additional levels of epigenetic information, as well as top-down causation in the living cell, are pointers to the existence of mind behind the cosmos. And I can think of no better way than putting it than the initial statement in John's Gospel in the New Testament. In the beginning was the Word. All things came to be through him. To sum up then, the atheist naturalist worldview undermines, in my view, the foundations of the very rationality that's needed to construct or understand or believe in any kind of argument whatsoever, let alone a scientific one. Atheism is therefore beginning to sound like a great self-contradictory Dawkins delusion, to use his words, a persistent false belief held in the face of strong contradictory evidence. Of course, I reject atheism because I believe Christianity to be true, but I also reject it because I'm a scientist. How could I be impressed with a worldview that undermines the very rationality I need to do science? So science and God mix very well. It's science and atheism that don't mix. Thank you very much.